Hello and welcome back to the Out of Program podcast. Today we're joined by Dr. David Montgomery, who is a consultant in pharmaceutical medicine, a former pharmaceutical executive, and most recently the co-founder of PM Life Sciences, a pharmaceutical advisory firm and consultancy. Hi David, welcome to the show.
Hi, it's really good to be here.
Brilliant. So we always start with the same question, which is your early career. Now, I think what's interesting is, of course, you got into pharmaceutical medicine, but you actually started your early career as a surgical trainee. So do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I started my career in 2001. So I did medicine in Glasgow and then had a very sort of orthodox, I think, approach to the beginning of my career in the old style of training. So I came out and did a JHO job and then basic surgical training. I then did an SHO3 post, and you were at that stage in time, and we may get on to academic medicine and some of the challenges that's facing, but at that time in cut to do our higher research degree before going on to a training program. So I took 2 years out and did my master's in surgery, by which time, when I'd completed it, the sort of training program in surgery had really very much changed. Modernizing medical careers had come in, run through training had been introduced, and there was a little bit of chaos in the surgical training program and session at that time, round about, what would that be, 8. I loved bits of my surgical career. There were some amazing elements of it, but I guess I'd been somewhat frustrated in the first sort of 7 or 8 years of my career by the challenges of trying to train in a craft specialty under European Working Time Directive when we were so reduced in our ability to go into hospitals and spend time there. And, you know, you've got to be there a fair amount to see enough cases to really get good at your craft in surgery. So I think when the training programs changed and there was a lot of chaos and no one was sure whether people would get onto programs, it provided a really interesting opportunity for me to think about whether this was actually the career for the rest of my life or whether I'd do something different.
That's really interesting because, you know, I'm comparing it to kind of the views of the newer generations of clinicians. I think that, you know, as you mentioned, surgery is a vocation, so you need to get that clinical experience. But it sounds to me like you made a strategic kind of career choice because you were a trainee surgeon for quite a while, I think about 7 or 8 years. And then, of course, the policy change took effect. And then what it sounds like is that you looked at the landscape and thought to yourself, well, whilst I enjoy surgery, I don't know if I'm going to get enough clinical experience and I don't know if there's going to be jobs. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, not know whether there's going to be jobs. And I think, I mean, we see that a little bit today. It is interesting because for sort of modern listeners, people under the age of sort of 45, I guess, who've probably haven't really thought about the older style of training. What you've got to remember is back in the day, people would often spend 6, 7, 8 years in surgical training, 10 years in surgical training, SHO posts, SHO3 posts, research, etc., before they got their training number, before they became a registrar. And that sort of specialist registrar training program was then very focused, very quick, 4 or 5 years, and you became a consultant. But it took a long time to get there, and it was never all that certain. So it wasn't unusual at that stage to have done 7 or 8 years and leave and do something else. I think in today's world, where you go straight onto a training program, by the time you've done 7 or 8 years in surgery, you're almost in many specialties, you're almost a consultant. So you would just keep going. But life was a little bit different then. So, you know, I faced uncertainty over whether I would get a number. There were lots of my colleagues in a similar boat. Most of them stayed and did absolutely fine, but it took them, quite a few of them, probably 10 years from that point to become consultants. So yeah, I made a strategic decision to leave medicine. How strategic my decision was to join the pharmaceutical industry is a whole different question.
So let's talk a little bit about that. Because you'd done, you know, a number of years in surgery. You took stock of the climate at the time, and then you pivoted into pharmaceutical medicine. So talk to me about how you came across this specialty and ultimately chose to go down that path.
As with lots of these things, it was pure serendipity. So my wife is a consultant breast surgeon. She was my boss actually when we met, which would be again frowned upon. I'm looking like a complete dinosaur in this podcast, right? The surgical trainee that marries his boss. You don't get that anymore either, I don't think. But it was acceptable then, just about still acceptable then. She attended a breast cancer conference in Edinburgh, Bill Miller's old meeting in Edinburgh, and was sitting beside one of the medical advisors from Pfizer. My wife trained in Australia, so the very live discussion we were having at that stage was, do we go back to Australia? So she had a consultant post waiting for her. And I think if the Australians, if it had been braver and if there'd been slightly more guarantees, we may have gone to Australia and continued my surgical training there at that stage. I think Catherine was really enjoying the NHS. It is, whatever you say, a much less pressured environment. In Oz, you've really sort of got to build your private practice very, very quickly. You've got to take on a lot of debt to do it. You've got to service it. You've got to work hard. In the UK, that's much more discretionary. And so I think she was quite enjoying an NHS practice, learning, doing a bit of academic work. And I think she really wanted to stay. So she was sitting beside a medical advisor from Pfizer at a conference in Edinburgh, and they got talking. And she said, "Oh, how would you go? What is this job, and how would you go about it? What did you do before?" It turned out the medical advisor in question had been a breast surgical trainee before she came across, so there were significant parallels. Actually, the answer to the question, how do you do this, was, well, we've got a job open available. It's a field-based role based in Scotland, which is where we were living at the time. We haven't been able to fill it. If he wanted to come to industry, that would be the perfect start. So, yeah, I mean, it was really that serendipitous. It was nothing cleverer. Within 2 or 3 weeks, I'd spoken to the boss and I'd been offered the role.
Was there any trepidation to taking that? Because it was very different to what you knew.
Yeah, there was. I mean, there really was. I wasn't loving the job I was in at the time. I had a dreadful commute. We were doing lots of night shifts, commuting home after night shifts. I think around about that time, we'd lost one of our doctors. She'd been fatally injured in a car crash coming home after a night shift. And so I think there was a lot of unhappiness in the profession. And it was interesting when I made the decision, I wasn't sure what I was expecting in terms of a backlash or a supportive environment. I went to speak to one of the senior consultants in the hospital, and he said, "Look, I think it's a mess just now. I don't know if we'll be able to get everyone onto training programs. I think it's hugely uncertain. If you've found something else that sounds amazing, grab it. It gives me one less person to worry about. It gives you one less thing to worry about." I went to see my old boss, Tim Cook, that I'd done my research with, and he said, "Explore it. There's a bit of time to sort out what's going on. If you change your mind, come back and see me. It's not a problem." So I didn't feel it was a one-way step necessarily. I didn't feel I was burning any bridges. I felt I would explore it and see. And so it felt quite safe. And actually, I was the first person I'd ever heard of to go into the pharmaceutical industry. I'd never met a pharmaceutical physician before. I didn't know what it was. But within my 3-month notice period, 3 others had made the same move and just from my hospital. So I think the fact that I'd cast a bit of light on the fact that this could happen and you could do it motivated quite a lot of other people to follow.
Very interesting. And I guess then with this transition, how were those kind of early years in pharmaceutical medicine for you? Because it's, of course, a big adaptation.
It was really interesting because I think we had a period of time. So I had just finished my research. I was doing a lot of publications at the time. We'd published a lot. I was talking at a lot of events. And I took this sort of field-based role. We had a breast cancer medicine. And my boss was incredibly supportive of me continuing to do that work. So I spent the first year as a field-based medical advisor, medical manager, and I spoke at maybe 10 conferences, including some international conferences on my old research, my old academic research. So it wasn't a sort of clean break transition for me. It was a sort of eased phase in, and it really helped my reputation. I remember sitting at a meeting with some of our sales team at Pfizer, and they were talking about, we'd looked at how you do follow-up after breast cancer care, and this was a major challenge at the time. No one was really very sure, but we published a huge amount of evidence that no one had ever really thought of publishing or looking at before. And we kind of made some recommendations for the first time. And they were, I mean, we changed the way we do this globally, ex-US. America does things differently, but we really changed the way we do things globally with that research. And I remember sitting in this meeting in New York, and one of my papers was on every single slide for sort of 10 consecutive slides. And the sales rep beside me turned around and he said, "This Montgomery guy is amazing. Imagine you were this Montgomery guy." And I was like, oh. So that was really nice, a really neat transition. And I did that role at that stage, I got involved with the Faculty of Pharmaceutical Medicine at the time. So I started the training program. I did the diploma exam sort of 18 months afterwards. So I had an exam I could do in pharmaceutical medicine, right? And we love exams as junior doctors. So if you can throw some academia at it, that feels real. I got some more letters after my name. So there were many things about it that eased the transition and made it feel quite familiar. I had a lovely team. I got promoted to medical manager very quickly, sort of 12, 18 months in. And then I got promoted to medical director probably 12, 18 months after that. So I was head of UK medical affairs for Pfizer Oncology within sort of 2.5 years of leaving medicine. So it was quite a whirlwind. I'd learned a lot. I'd been promoted to quite big promotions, I guess. And I was now leading a team. And we were launching medicines and building an oncology business unit within Pfizer. I was doing lots of external engagements, sitting on lots of committees. 12, I got invited to sit on the Cancer Drugs Fund for industry. So sort of 4 years out, I was the industry person invited to join the board of the Cancer Drugs Fund and help sort it out. It had just been introduced after Cameron won the 2010 election, and it was still, no one was quite sure what to do with it. So over sort of the next 2 or 3 years, we worked together to fix that. So I spent quite a lot of time working with NHS colleagues as well. So I continued to feel quite sort of integrated into the healthcare system, into the NHS throughout those early days in industry. And I think all of that really made it a very smooth transition.
And what was it about your personal skills or characteristics that gave you such a phenomenal rise? Because 2.5 years into an executive role, I mean, that is stunning compared to, say, the 7 years in surgical training. Now, of course, different stages of career, but, that is a very steep slope.
It is. I mean, one of the things I've learned in life, I think, is once you leave medicine, you leave behind. Medicine is I think medicine is an incredibly hierarchical, structured, meritocratic, I think, for the most part, profession. You kind of have to do your time, tick the boxes, go through the process, sit the exams, and some people can be quicker than others, but only really within reason, right? Up until the point you become a consultant, and then it becomes a bit more variable, but certainly that early stage. The same isn't true elsewhere. I've seen people get elected into public office who can't get dressed in the morning. I honestly, the world outside of medicine is far less meritocratic, far less structured. And I think I was a heady combination of diligent, I think. I had a bit of a reputation. I think the research and the fact that I sat within the community comfortably and I could talk that language and I had credibility within the NHS helped with my reputation within the company. I think I was seen as being a safe pair of hands. I think I was probably seen for the most part as being supportive and kind, helpful. And to a huge extent, I was just, certainly with the medical director role, I was really just in the right place at the right time. My boss went off on a secondment, so they couldn't look outside of the team to replace him. And I was really the only person in the team who was in a place to be able to do it. Part of that was actually because of people being off on maternity leave and others. I mean, there were probably a couple of others who, in any normal run of things, would have competed with me for those roles, but they weren't there. They weren't available for them. And so some of that was just serendipity. Yeah, I guess a whole combination of just working hard, getting on with people, being interested and taking opportunities, being in the right place at the right time, saying yes even when it's terrifying. I think those are all the things that helped.
And I suppose you mentioned that you were one of the kind of early clinicians that moved into pharmaceutical medicine. Was it was it as lucrative as it's perceived today, especially in those early, like, junior roles?
From Glasgow. So I think there has been a much wider tradition of this in London, Cambridge, Oxford, where there's a much greater proximity between industry. I mean, there were lots of doctors in industry when I arrived, but not many of them from up north. I think that was the big difference. I think the industry is very concentrated in the southeast, and I think there's more of a sort of transition between the two. No, I would say overall, on balance, there are times when it has been more lucrative and times when it has been less lucrative relative to where I was or what I could have done. I mean, I think when you're a junior doctor, I mean, I was on band 1A job, so I wasn't earning a huge amount of money. Even though I was a registrar, I wasn't earning a huge amount of money. So when I came to industry, I probably got maybe a 10-15% pay rise. So I was probably on sort of £55,000 a year as a registrar, and I probably went to sort of 65, something like that, as in my first industry MSL role. This would have been 2008. Can't remember exactly, but it would have been that order of magnitude. But it's the other stuff that wraps itself around. So you get a car, and you get a bonus each year, and you can put quite a lot of the stuff that you have to have on your expense account. So you're not paying GMC fees, you're not paying revalidation fees, you're not paying exam fees anymore. These are all legitimate business expenses when you're in industry. And you know, if you're earning £55,000 a year, you're taking home, you know, £2,500, £3,000 a month maximum, right? And you're at the early stage in your career, so you've got a mortgage and you've got car loans and all this stuff. So all of a sudden I sold the car, didn't have a car loan to pay for anymore because I got given a company car, and I'm not paying GMC and I'm not paying whatever, and so yeah, it all kind of added up. But I wouldn't say I don't think. I mean, my wife's a consultant surgeon. We're quite similar in age. I think all the way through our careers, we've earned similar amounts of money.
Fair enough. And then you mentioned this rapid climb to a senior position in a pharma company, but then you opted later on to become the executive director of research at Prostate Cancer UK. So, what was the motivation for that leap?
So I'm gonna be very candid and open with you and your viewers, listeners. I got promoted to a vice president role towards the end of my time at Pfizer, a global VP role. Before the age of 40, I was incredibly proud of myself. Global VP in a major pharma company by 40. But I didn't nail it, truthfully. And that was another big promotion. I'd been a director, I think, or senior manager. I think I skipped 3 grades and went to VP. And I missed the politics of that. I didn't relocate to New York. I probably should have done. I, throughout my career, have been very strategic, but I've never written it down. I've just kind of gotten on and done it. When you're at that senior, and I chatted to someone else about this recently, when you're at that senior VP, SVP level in industry, people expect you to be able to write down a strategy and evidence it and put together a slide deck and all that sort of stuff, rather than take over a department and crack on and do things, justify a budget. And no one had ever taught me to do that. I'd never learned that. And so I don't think I nailed it. 18 months, well, maybe 12 months after I took on the role, my boss left the organisation in a bit of a hurry. The person who brought me into the role, which left me a little bit exposed. But then there was a global reorg, and my role was made redundant. And I think that was absolutely the right thing for the business. I think it was the right thing for me. So I took redundancy, didn't apply for anything else. And I think Prostate Cancer UK was probably a mixture of 2 things. I'd worked with a lot of patient groups over the years and really enjoyed working with them, and was fascinated to go and work in one for one and just get a bit of a feel for what it was like. I was keen. I think I'd seen myself become further and further removed from that integration into the UK academic medical sector. I think that with pricing and all the other discussions that we'd had as the 2010s wore on, there was more of a them and us beginning to develop, I think, between industry and the healthcare system. And we've seen a little bit about that with drug pricing and most favoured nation things. It's not as comfortable as it once was, I don't think. And I was beginning to feel that, feeling a little bit more removed from my colleagues in the healthcare system. And so there was a little bit of wanting to do that. But I think there was also a little bit of wanting to launder my career. So if I couldn't go to another VP role somewhere, and realistically, it was a dead odd VP role I'd been given, and all the other kind of VP roles you get in other companies, I wasn't really experienced enough for. So the reality is, if I'd stayed in industry at that stage, I would have had to have taken a demotion, a pay cut, whatever. And I think I was probably too proud to do that. I went to Prostate Cancer UK, took a huge pay cut to go to Prostate Cancer UK. But it gave me what I needed, which was a period of time to just lick my wounds at having been made redundant from Pfizer. I'm being very candid on this. But I think it's important, because I think I see people coming across these kind of problems in my one of my roles that I do just now when we come on to. I do a lot of sort of almost mental health support sometimes for people. And I see a lot of people who get made redundant from roles, and it kind of breaks them up a little bit. You know, they've never expected to have that happen to them as doctors, and they struggle with it. And it happens in industry. And I wish I'd been more relaxed about it. No one's watching you and waiting for you to succeed or fail. No one cares. No one cares. Not even my wife and kids really care. And as long as I'm happy, and I think you've got to be sort of kind to yourself. So yeah, there were some really positive reasons for going to Prostate Cancer UK, and maybe some slightly more defensive reasons. But it was brilliant. I loved it. I learned a ton. Of all the companies and organisations I've ever been in, it was probably one of the best run places I've been. There was a real sense of sort of vocation and commitment. I think Prostate Cancer UK are doing amazing stuff. So I'm very grateful for the 18 months I had there. I'm sad it was shorter. Unfortunately, COVID hit, and we had to make some quite difficult decisions as a management team.
I see. And what were the biggest differences in learning between, you being at Prostate Cancer UK versus being in industry, in pharma?
I don't think there was any difference. Truthfully, I would actually say Prostate Cancer UK felt more similar to Pfizer than some of the companies I subsequently went to did to Pfizer. I think there's a greater difference between a small pharma company and a big pharma company than there is between a big charity and a big pharma company. So Prostate Cancer UK had a chief executive, had a board, had a management team that I was on, an executive team that I was on, and depending on how you structured it, 10, 15 departments who all worked on very distinct things. We had a fundraising team, we had a corporate affairs team, we had a research team, we had a group of nurses who gave support. It was very corporate structure. Well, lots of sort of governance rules, lots of compliance rules. It felt very, very similar to Pfizer, actually. The only thing I learned that I probably hadn't realised is just how professional a large charity is and has to be. That was maybe a surprise. But yeah, I guess I learned a fair amount about how charities think about funding research, how you structure return on investment when you're not trying to create a product in the same way, or place in the ecosystem. I'm always interested in the totality of the ecosystem. That was one of the things I enjoyed about going to the charity. I think very, very few people in their career have done healthcare system, charity, pharmaceutical industry, big, small, medium, consultancy, biotech, politics, small p and big P. And I think when you understand the ecosystem really effectively, when you've worked in it all and you can see how it all joins up, that's remarkably helpful. Certainly in my role in this consultancy, that's been remarkably helpful.
Really interesting. And I want to take a few steps back. And one of the things we haven't talked about, which I'd love to kind of hear from you about, is that you actually had a bit of a political career as well, alongside all the many things that we've described. So can you add a bit more colour to that?
Yeah, so I wouldn't describe it as a political career. I have dabbled in politics, done a bit of volunteering, I suppose. Yeah, so I got into that. Very early on in my time at Pfizer, I became very interested in how the system works And again, in particular, policy and how policy plays into decisions within a major corporation or a major industry. We didn't really have industrial strategy, but it's become even more interesting now that there is an industrial strategy and a life sciences sector deal and things like that. So I ended up doing quite a lot of lobbying, went to party conference, because we were in power at the time, 2013, was very interested, met a lot of very interesting people, and I decided subsequently to join the party, partly because we were just about to go into the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, and I really wanted to get involved in trying to keep Scotland in the Union. So I joined the local Conservative Party and went along to the AGM shortly after I joined, and they were looking for officers for the association. And Ruth Davidson, who was leader of the Scottish Conservatives at the time, I'd spoken to her briefly on the way in. And when one of the officer positions looked like it wasn't going to get volunteers, she turned round from the front row and said, "I met David Montgomery on my way in. He's not been with us long, but I think he'd be excellent in the role." So my first meeting, I found myself on the executive of the Glasgow Conservative Association. We got through the independence referendum. We were successful. And then that party conference, Ruth's chief of staff, or Ruth's campaign manager in the west of Scotland, sidled up and said, "We'd like you to apply to run in East Renfrewshire." Again, serendipity, opportunity, saying yes when you're approached, nothing structured or strategic about it. Speaking to people and getting involved. And within sort of a couple of years I found myself a candidate in a general election. A very bruising general election, 2015. So it was the first election after the independence referendum. Many of your viewers and listeners might not be that familiar, but essentially there are 59 seats in Scotland and 56 of them were won by the Scottish National Party in a huge sort of protest vote. And it was just very bruising sort of election. Ruth asked me if I'd applied to stand for Holyrood in 2016, and I decided I didn't really want to do that. We moved down south at that stage, and I avowed not to have anything more to do with politics. But interestingly, within a few weeks of being down south, I'd rejoined the Conservatives. It felt safer in Surrey than it did in Glasgow. Although I have to confess, it's much, much less safe in Surrey now than it was. They've been replaced almost wholesale by the Liberal Democrats over the last few months. But yeah, so I came down and I was chairman of the association for 3 years and president for a year. I mean, leaving aside the politics, I'm not a member of the Conservative Party anymore. My politics really don't align to any particular political party now. I'm much more interested in policy than I am in politics. That's one of the things I've learned about myself. But running a voluntary organisation of that type, being responsible for income and selection of council, I chaired the local government committee. We decided who was acceptable as a candidate for we had to do all of the vetting ourselves and all of the interviewing for who became a councillor in the area. Did this? I never had to worry about the MP because the MP throughout my time had been in post for a while and tended to win quite easily. So we didn't do a lot of campaigning. But the process of being involved, even though I never got elected, the process of being involved in the voluntary party of a political movement of that type, I think it's a huge privilege to see local politics up close like that and be involved in it. I think I'm sad that I've never been elected in some ways. I think I'd hate it. But it's possibly an itch I'll scratch at some stage in the future in some way or another. But yeah, if that was a really interesting period of life as well.
No, it definitely sounds it. And I guess you see some examples of clinicians now, getting more involved in politics and actually becoming MPs, which is super interesting. From a career perspective, did you see much synergies between, what you were doing with the Conservative Party or in politics alongside, pharmaceutical medicine or your work in industry?
Yeah, I did. I did and I do. Almost everything that happens, there is some element of politics at play. And I've always been very supportive of trying to effect change through the system. I have to say, over the last 5 years, 10 years, certainly 5 years, I've become more and more concerned about that. It'll be interesting to see how local government reacts. There's been huge turnover and I think that the nature of our politics now, they've become so much more volatile We've now, with the latest changes in the Labour Party, we've now had 47 people have been ministers in the Department of Health in the past 11 years. So that's with an average tenure of 1 year and 3 days. When have you ever done a job that you became so fantastic in it in 1 year and 3 days that it was time to move on? Never, right? I mean, never. And so and we haven't had a prime minister win an election and then contest the next election. Now that should be routine. But we haven't had a prime minister win an election, then an outright majority, and contest the next election for a quarter of a century.
Very interesting.
And so we have this huge political instability. But I still think politics is really important. I still think, the question, when you understand the pressure that parliamentarians, councillors and others are under, the huge drain on your time, when you see a problem, you can define it, describe it, and present some solutions to it with some evidence in a way that resonates, hopefully more than others will. So I think your campaigning for change becomes more effective and more efficient because you would want to see yourself. And with the industry, biotech sector, everywhere you go, we need favourable conditions for success. And so I very much sort of see a link. If you want to operate at a high level and be excellent at what you do, you've got to navigate that political environment. We see that no more so than the tech bros in the US, right?
It's really great hearing your passion about the topic, and I can really tell that this is definitely an itch that you will scratch in the future.
Maybe.
Now, I want to talk about your most recent venture, which is PM Life Sciences. So you've had this illustrious career in pharma, in the charity sector. You've now jumped into...
That's very kind of you. For complete disclosure, I haven't paid you to say that. That's come entirely from you.
But now you've jumped into, entrepreneurship. You're starting from scratch, and you're building something that is your own. So can you tell me what the motivation for that was, and, what have been the kind of challenges or opportunities that you've seen?
I had gotten to a stage, once again, I think there was push and pull. So I'd gotten to a stage, I think, where I just didn't feel I was learning anymore within the industry. And I think, and I'm 48 years old now. So if I was 58 and I had been feeling like that, I'd probably just have coped for 2 or 3 more years. But at 48, I'm ever restless, and I don't know if I'll ever retire, but I'm certainly not going to think about it for another 20 years. Kind of need to learn and be challenged and experience new things. I think that's the one. I'm ever curious. I had been really stuck. So when I left Prostate Cancer UK as a consequence of the COVID pandemic, I came back into industry and I learned some things. I worked at Daiichi Sankyo as UK Medical Director, then at Menarini Stemline as UK Medical Director, then at Ipsen as Medical Director, UK Medical Director. We launched 4 new medicines across 5 indications during that time, did some peri-launch stuff for various other things. I took Daiichi through 4 PMCPA audits in the space of 3 years. So that's the sort of regulator, I guess, self-regulator. So I learned some things, but I'd gotten 3 companies in 2.5 years, I think, at one stage when I left Daiichi. I was a year at Stemline, and I knew I needed to do something completely different. And I have a colleague, Shuli Porkis, formerly medical director, director of research and innovation at the ABPI, pharmaceutical physician, currently president of the faculty of pharmaceutical medicine, really smart, very motivated, very driven, just a great person, great mate. And she had been doing consultancy on and off for a period of time and really wanted to give it a go. And I'd sat down with her and we'd been sort of discussing career dilemmas, and we said, let's do this together. Let's just see what happens. Let's set it up and do it together. And it was terrifying. I was earning a huge amount of money as a UK medical director. I read my contract wrong and found it and discovered after I'd left Ipsen, or after I'd resigned from Ipsen, that I had to pay back my sign-on bonus. So I started from not just giving away my salary, but also not getting my final pay at all, and then having to pay some cash back to Ipsen. So there was this big sort of psychological moment where I'm like, oh my God, I'm miles behind where I should be. And with each passing month where you don't get your pay slip in, you think, my God, I'm so far behind. But look, I'm super lucky. I've worked hard all my life. I've made great money all my life. I'm not extravagant. I've got a 17-year-old car. We've saved very, very hard and made sure we've been really, really careful. My wife earns great money. And so between us, we put ourselves in a position where we could do it. We could take the risk. And that's been immensely liberating, because we're 8 months in now, and the diversity of things I'm seeing. We've got a really interesting sort of client base, an interesting mix of biotech, large pharma, trade bodies, small tech startups. We're doing some really, 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 really diverse, interesting things in policy as well as in helping commercialize medicines. We've got clients ex-UK, US, China. And it's been amazing, and I'm just learning every single day. I'm having to solve problems, and that's been wonderful. I would say, even though I've done it with a colleague, with a friend, she's quite busy. She does quite a lot of other stuff outside with the faculty role and other things. We make a habit of every week we spend a whole day together where we deal with complex problems, do a bit of business development, think about things, go for lunch, just spend some real quality time together. I think if you're going to do entrepreneurship, and you can talk to this as well, I'm sure, working out who you are and how you work socially, and how you're going to replace the office environment and the interactions you get in the office environment in a way that allows you to make sure you maintain your mental health is really, really critical. So there are days where I've got nothing in the diary, there's no meetings, there's nothing on, and I'm they're few and far between, but I have faced them with trepidation because I'm very much into people. And so I would say that's been the one sort of drawback. But yeah, I mean, it's amazing. I'm learning tons. I'm experiencing lots. We're doing some great stuff. And we're making a bit of money now as well. We're paying ourselves a salary from last month, which, 6 months in to be in a situation where you can start paying yourself a salary is phenomenal, right? So we've done some great stuff.
Brilliant. I mean, some of the early stages of company building are, you see the soaring highs, the crashing lows, but, regardless of what it is, it's exhilarating.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I don't think we've had any crashing lows. I think we've been quite lucky in that sense. I mean, we've had some things where we've not gotten something that we think we probably should have. And it was interesting. We brought in a regulatory affairs expert into the group. We're just discussing what the relationship is, because we lost a proposal with someone I know, actually. I don't want to go into too much detail, but I think we would have gotten it if we had some regulatory experience in the team as well. Having brought that experience in, it's really opened up our sort of potential client base and our offering. So that's been really, really helpful as well. But yeah, no, we've not had any. We've learned from the things which haven't gone quite right. I mean, it's an experience, and we're gonna, this is hopefully, I'm very good friends with a guy called Alan Boyd, who runs Boyd's regulatory consultancy. I hope Alan will be comfortable with me saying he's been very much a mentor to me over the years. And he started his consultancy probably a similar sort of age to the one I am now. And is still, having a wonderful time doing it at whatever stage in his career Alan now is. And I think that, it's amazing. If you get the opportunity, I would say to anyone, if you get the opportunity to go and do something, build something on your own, it's well worth doing, right? It's so exciting.
100%. We're running out of time now, so I wanted to ask a final question, which is actually around pharmaceutical medicine. Now, you and I have talked about it as a specialism, and I've even, and it's funny because, the grass is often greener. So for me, having had this long entrepreneurial career, the thought of actually, becoming a consultant in pharmaceutical medicine is, seemed quite appealing. I guess my first question around that is, from your perspective, are you seeing more interest in the specialty, given that it is kind of more industry facing in the current climate? And then secondly, how do you view that decision to move into pharmaceutical medicine when you'd kind of pivoted from, a direct kind of clinical role?
It's a really good question. And pharmaceutical medicine is a very broad specialty. So within pharmaceutical medicine, you've got medical affairs, which is a very sort of late stage development, but actually quite commercial function. You've got drug safety pharmacovigilance, you've got regulatory affairs, you've got clinical development, early stage, middle stage, late stage. You've got the biotech sector, which is often very scientific. And of course, you can move to the commercial side and be a general manager and whatever. I mean, there's lots and lots of ways you can take it. Is it growing in popularity? I mean, the industry just now is in a really interesting place. I think we've seen a lot of the bigger pharma companies making layoffs, making redundancies in the last few years. I think there's probably I'd say generally speaking, in many ways, there's probably a bit less innovation today than there has been at the peak. I think it's a little bit harder now than it maybe was when the heady days of the progress we made on cardiovascular medicine and things like that, for example, where if you think about how many medicines we've invented over the years and the sort of big impact, I think it is getting harder now, smaller patient populations for economic cases. It's an interesting profession. But has been, I mean, it's, I haven't loved every second of every day, but I've loved my career. When I look back, I'm proud of what I've achieved, and I've been exposed to things that I don't think I would have been exposed to had I stayed in medicine, particularly had I stayed in medicine in Scotland. I mean, I get a real sense that London's quite different than the rest of the UK, and that there's much more interplay between the various different bits of the specialty. Or the various different bits of medicine. But no, I love pharmaceutical medicine. I love that it's got a structure. I do a lot of work for the faculty as well, because I think we help maintain standards and maintain cohesion in the specialty. And I think that's really, really important to me. We train pharmaceutical physicians, we revalidate pharmaceutical physicians, and I oversee that revalidation process for the faculty. And I think it's a real privilege. But I think being a doctor, you just got to not lose sight of that. At the end of the day, you don't need to see patients. I just read Regeneration Trilogy, Pat Barker. It's a fictional account of the life of W.H.R. Rivers, who was a psychiatrist during the First World War, dealt with shell shock and various other things, and he published his notes on dealing with shell shock in the Lancet on February the 7th, 1918. So I was in the Royal Society of Medicine the other day, and I went and looked it up, and I'm in awe of some of these old historical documents. I got my 1918 Lancet out of the library, but on the next page there was an article by Fleming on gas gangrene. 10 years and 4 months before he discovered penicillin. And, for a long time I thought, I'm not seeing patients, I'm not having an impact. I'd say Fleming had an impact on the day that he wasn't seeing patients more than he had on any other day, right? With the invention of penicillin or the discovery of penicillin. So I think pharmaceutical medicine is astonishing. You can just have this if you're lucky. I look back at the medicines I've brought to market in the UK and the things I've done, and I'll never meet the patients, but I know they're there. I can't hear you. I think you might be on mute.
Apologies. And on that note, that's all the time we have for today. For those listening, if you like what you hear and want to support the show, please do like and subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or whatever podcast platform you're currently listening to us on. It would mean a lot to me, and it would help spread the message to others exploring alternative paths. Thanks for joining us, and see you next time. Bye-bye.